These are the 6 rules that I follow to be a Dean's List biomedical engineering student, getting both my bachelor's and master's at the same time, not to mention building a business, having a social life, and creating content, which I love to do. Listen to me very carefully when I say this. You are powerful beyond measure, but I understand that the school experience makes you feel like it's the opposite. But I believe that that can be appeased if I teach you how to learn. And why school doesn't do this for you, I'm not exactly sure. So I'll take this on as my responsibility. With these 6 rules, I believe that you can make your school experience much more effective and efficient so you have more time to do the things that you actually want to do. If you're new here, my name is June Yu, and my goal is to help you reach your full potential in every aspect of life. It can be with academics, it can be with business, it can be with prospective careers, relationships, you name it, I'm here for you. So give this video a thumbs up and of course subscribe. Rule number 1, start early. Never let your class time be your first exposure to a topic. Why? Well, it's because that all the details that are presented to you are going to be irrelevant. They're not going to have any meaning. They're not going to benefit you in any way. They're not going to interest you in any way. So how would you be able to stay engaged with that content? That's why you're dozing off. Of course you're dozing off because to you think, yeah, this is just a lot of information. Yeah, I don't even understand what part of this is important and I'm just going to check out at this point. And that's not what I want you to have. I want you to be able to leave your class actually effectively understanding the material. So what can we do? We can prime. And it's called priming because we're priming our brains, we're preparing our brains to be able to absorb information effectively in class. So how do we do this? You can skim resources ahead of time that pertain to the topic that you know is going to be covered based on your syllabus. So in other words, perhaps you have a textbook, perhaps you have the presentation slides ahead of time, perhaps you have an external source like an online module, whatever pertains to that topic, you're simply going to skim them. Skim is the key word here. You're not going to try and learn the material before you get into class completely, because then you're just doubling on your time. You don't need to do that. But here, all you're trying to do is understand the big picture of the topic. Why? Well, it's because then when you go to class, the details are then relevant to you. They have meaning to you. They have a function in that big picture, and that's how you can stay engaged with the content. You actually have the ability then to think to yourself, yeah, this information is really crucial because I saw it be repeated a ton in the prior resource that I was looking at, or perhaps this information does not pertain to the topic at all and the teacher is just going overboard here. So you have the ability to better discern when you're in class and also be able to connect those details to the big picture, allowing you to absorb information effectively and efficiently. So start early. Rule number 2, prioritize rest. Neuroplasticity, aka how we learn, is broken up into 2 phases. The first one is deep focus, but the second one, which goes overlooked too many times, is deep rest. The memory consolidation that happens, the rewiring of the neurons happens in phase 2. So if you only focus on maximizing each of your study sessions, but then fail to prioritize the rest afterwards, you are missing a huge component of the entire process of neuroplasticity. A great example that illustrates this issue is if you've ever crammed. Perhaps you did well on the exam, especially if you were in an easy class or it was in high school where there were more regurgitation questions that didn't require deeper comprehension. So you were able to get away with surface level study. But if you think about that situation, how much of that content do you remember after the exam was over? Knowing that information builds, perhaps it was a unit test earlier on in the year, and then you had your midterm and your final. How much of that did you have to revisit? Probably all of it, or probably a majority of it. Why? Because the consolidation never happened, right? Or you weren't optimizing the process. And that's why it's so important for us to be able to ensure that we're prioritizing our rest afterwards, especially if we're learning a lot of material throughout our revision. Ensure that you are getting your 7-9 hours of rest afterwards. And then you may be saying, June, but it's so hard because there's so much information to review right before my exam. And I would say perhaps there are better ways that we can optimize your learning system ahead of time. Are there ways for us to integrate spaced repetition, interleaving within your revision timetables, along with your priming, more effective in-class notes, along with your post-class immediate review and your revision strategies with active recall? I think that there are. And I think if you're able to do those things, you're able to ensure that you aren't cramming last minute, that you don't have to pull all-nighters, and all of this type of habits that you can instill in yourself yourself as a student will allow you to make this process much more effective and efficient. Before we move into the remainder of the rules, I want to preface it by saying that these rules are specific to academics, but we understand that self-growth pertains to many areas of our lives if we want to be the best versions of ourselves. Now, I have an opportunity to be able to do this in the most interactive and in-depth way than ever before, and it's through the winning formula for self-growth. This is my new online community and mentorship program that we've been working on for a very long time, along with over 50 educational classes and templates and resources that cover all areas of self-growth and personal development. From making money to being an exceptional academic student to being able to build prospective careers and have healthy relationships and being more productive, along with being the healthiest mentally, physically, and spiritually than ever before, the winning formula for self-growth has something for you. You'll have frameworks and challenges to build and stack positive habits. You'll have access to support and guidance along your entire journey. You'll have coaching from me and my team. And of course, the best accountability group of like-minded individuals so that you can ensure that you meet your biggest goals. I'm so excited to announce it's finally launching this Wednesday, May 15th. Join the waitlist in the description to be the first to know and hopefully be one of the founding members. There are already so many people on the list and I am so excited to connect with all of you. With that being said, let's get into the rest of the video. Rule number 3, no bad notes. So what constitutes bad notes? It's when there is no active engagement. It's when there is no meaningful learning occurring. It's when we write in verbatim what the professor had just said. Just because you had gotten it down on paper doesn't mean that it actually processed up here where it matters, right? Now, I bet if you were to recall one of your favorite classes in the past, that there would be material that you would be able to even today be tested on and know the answer to. That you had just such an active engagement with it because the information was relevant to you that you didn't even need to note it down, right? And that's possible because learning doesn't happen on that piece of paper, but it allows you then to think, what can we do in our notes to then facilitate the process of learning? I think that there are 3 main ways that we can do this. The first way is through a diagram in which you can actively make connections between concepts, knowing that our brain's ability to deeply understand information and then remember it is enhanced when there are more relevant connections. This is your opportunity to visualize them all in one spot. The second way to do this is through key observations that leverage the hypercorrection effect. The hypercorrection effect states that we have the tendency to learn better when we're corrected on an answer versus if we had gotten it correct the first time around. So during our priming stage, we had skimmed those resources and we were subconsciously making assumptions. Because we don't have all the details, we were actively filling in the gaps based on our prior knowledge, which is good. And perhaps you also had utilized a pretest during this stage as well. Now, some of those assumptions, along with some of those questions during your pretest, you would have gotten wrong. And that's okay, because then you have the ability to leverage that hypercorrection effect here. So it's your opportunity to note down things during the priming stage that you thought you knew, or the things that you thought you got right, but perhaps you were fixed on. So this is your opportunity to note down those key observations based on those areas that you were corrected on, and it allows you to further actively engage with the material that's presented to you in class. The third way, and probably my favorite way, are with active recall questions that you are creating in real time. This is your opportunity to take an additional step into the teacher's mind and ask yourself, how can this information be tested? Why is this information important? How is this information relevant to the material that we've learned before? In what types of applications or examples or scenarios can this information be tested in? And having that opportunity to take that step really allows you to actively engage with that material. So that's another way for you to be able to actually have meaningful learning occur. And also what that list of active recall questions will do for you is provide you the best review sheet immediately after class. You can go over those active recall questions, trying to freely recall the information based on what you had just learned in class. And you have the opportunity here to scope down what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. So you can start to consolidate the information that you got right and then be able to scope down on your weaknesses for further revision in the future. This is how you do it effectively and efficiently. Rule number 4, test yourself constantly. This is our opportunity to further lean into the benefits of active recall. And we know that that is one of the techniques that are so well supported across literature. Now, we can do this throughout our revisions through strategies like the learning method, the Feynman technique, along with practice tests and the use of a study buddy as well. But we now saw that you can do it during a priming stage if you were to use pre-test questions, or you can do it in class with your active recall questions that we just spoke about. But here, I want to talk about why we're doing this and why it's so important to implement active recall constantly throughout our revision timetable. Well, it's because it allows us to accurately identify gaps of knowledge. What do I mean by this? Too many times we look at material, see that some of it is familiar, and then fall under the false impression that we actually know the content, only to be tested on the information and not be able to answer, especially as you get into higher education and your questions aren't regurgitation questions, but instead it requires you to be able to analyze situations, be able to compare and contrast, to be able to further synthesize new knowledge. All of those deeper comprehension questions require you to actually know the information inside and out. Now, if you passively go about your material, that's where you get caught. But in order to be the best student, you should be testing yourself constantly so that you can consolidate the information that you do know, but be able to further scope down the material that you don't know. So as you get closer to exam, you can focus your attention more on those areas, and that's how you're able to be approaching revisions a lot more efficiently than if you were to think to yourself, because I'm revising for X topic, I have to review all of the material for X topic. When in reality, there's going to be some of that content that you do know well, but it's your time now to focus on those areas of weakness, and you can only do that if you're constantly testing yourself throughout your revision timetable. Rule number 5, spacing. We just spoke about how it's so important for us to test ourselves with active recall constantly, but practically, what does that look like? Well, it's with spaced repetition that we can integrate within our revision timetables. Irving Ebbinghaus had discovered the forgetting curve, which showed that us as human beings, we rapidly forget information almost immediately upon learning it. The best way to combat this is through spaced repetition. Practically, what this will look like is for us to have shorter intervals between study sessions while the material is still new, and then wider intervals when the material becomes a little bit more familiar. And then you might be asking yourself right now, June, how is this possible? How do you expect me to revise this many times when I'm already so busy? Well, you have to remember that each subsequent session, you will have higher baseline knowledge because you wouldn't have forgotten the information. In other words, you aren't spending as much time within those subsequent sessions. Moreover, you'll be saving yourself a ton of time because if you don't approach it with spaced repetition, likely you'll have to cram for it for days ahead of your exam. Instead, if you implement spaced repetition with active recall properly before your exams, you are perhaps doing a short review, but that's all you need instead of learning that material from scratch. My history teacher in high school actually emphasized this point so many times that it's fully ingrained in my mind. He would always say, June, get touches on the material. Don't think about spending hours within each session just focused on a specific topic and thinking that that's enough. Instead, what you have to do is you have effective but shorter sessions, and then knowing that you can spread it across through spaced repetition. What I used to do was what my history teacher was telling me not to do, which was spend those hours in each of those sessions, and then the next day or within a week, I would lose all that information and then I have to start from scratch right before exams. Don't let that be you. Utilize spaced repetition. Rule number 6, just 5 minutes. Think about how much more efficient we would be as students if we stopped procrastinating altogether. You see, whenever the topic of procrastination comes, when I'm speaking to somebody that I'm mentoring, I always try to address the root problem. You see, procrastination rarely happens because the task is overwhelming in and of itself. Instead, there is an underlying emotion tied to that task that we're actively running away from. So perhaps you are a perfectionist and you're afraid of messing up the work, so you are procrastinating your opportunity to go back to it. Perhaps you are feeling a sense of guilt because you are a leader of a team and you've been late on a piece of work, and because of that, you've let other people down. Now you don't want to return to that work. There's some sort of underlying emotion that's tied to that task. So then what is the remedy? It's for us to reduce the initial friction of that task to the best of our ability, and we do that by utilizing techniques such as the 5-minute rule. Now, the 5-minute rule states that you will commit to work for just 5 minutes before deciding whether or not to continue. Now, what does this do for us mentally? Instead of thinking to ourselves, hey, I'm going to study for 3 or 4 hours today because I have an exam tomorrow. Instead of saying that, what you can say to yourself is, I am just going to commit to 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I can do 5 minutes. Anybody can do 5 minutes. But what happens a lot of times? Well, in the 5 minutes, I would have opened up my computer, opened up the assignments, opened up the review content material. I would would have gotten my learning system book out, and I would start to dismantle some of those perceived complexities. What do I mean by perceived complexities? I mean that when we are procrastinating, what happens a lot of times is that we start to create these artificial complexities. We start to think that something is harder or more complex than it actually is. But once we get started, we realize, yeah, it's actually not that difficult. It's not that complex. You know what? I can do this. And 5 minutes sometimes is all that it takes. So yes, are there moments, perhaps 2 out of 10 times, where I don't continue? That's fine. Take a second, go and do something else for a little bit, and then revert back to the 5-minute rule. Eventually, you'll be able to bypass that first 5 minutes. You'll be able to build momentum in the right direction and then build confidence because you've been able to stick to your promise long after the commitment that you originally set that promise in. So it's a great way to really lower the expectation for yourself and make it easier for you to pursue whatever study session that you're looking to do. With that being said, that wraps up the 6 rules that I believe will help you make your learning experience much more effective and efficient. And whenever we can rely on a systematic approach, whether it's through these habits or whether it's through the learning system with the 4 stages in previous videos that we've discussed, it allows you to build so much more confidence as you go from chaos to clarity. It allows you to have focus on what exactly you need to do. It allows you to then put your attention effort where it matters so you're able to extract from those experiences to the best that you can possibly do it at. So I believe that this is your next step to hopefully being able to get the most out of your classes, to being able to get the most out of all of your learning experiences. If you like this video, give this video a thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave them below.